guys, welcome back to the Discipline Life Podcast, the place where we talk all about power differential relationships and domestic discipline. I'm Aria, and this is my husband, Coda.
Hello, everyone.
And on today's podcast, we are going to be delving into the subject of leadership, and more specifically, the responsibilities of leadership from the dominant side.
Uh-oh. This seems like a loaded conversation right here.
But before we get into the topic, if you are listening to us on YouTube, we really appreciate a thumbs up. And if you're not already, please consider subscribing and click the notification bell to be notified when we upload new content. If you want early access to the podcast as well as bonus content, you can subscribe to us on Patreon. Our link to our Patreon is down in the description box.
Indeed. Did we get it all covered?
I think so. Do you want to start on the topic of leadership? What is the position of leadership, and why do you think that the position of leadership is one of great responsibility?
This is a subject that Aria knows that I've read lots of books on. I have watched great documentaries, videos on what I would consider to be great leaders. And so that can be kind of a broad question, but let me see if I can deduce it. I think a great leader is someone who is not afraid to, there's a couple things, who's not afraid to tell people, come follow me, and I'll lead you, but not be afraid to openly admit to those people that he is inviting to follow him, that he doesn't have all the answers. And being able to admit that, and then along the way, make the changes needed in order to, because I think one of the things a great leader can do, one of the best things he can do is admit when he has shortcomings and where he messed up. People these days thinks a great leader has to have all the answers. He's got to be at the forefront of everything and can never admit that he's wrong. I mean, just look, without getting into any politics or anything, just look at politicians. Politicians are a perfect example of bad leadership. None of them can ever admit that they screwed up. And a good leader doesn't do that. A good leader knows when to admit fault. And in fact, I try to be the type of leader in my position that if somebody on my team fails, even though there might be consequences that need to be delivered or dished out, I take responsibility first. I go, where did I fail as a leader? I should have equipped them to do a better job. And so how this relates to domestic discipline relationship is then rather than just leading, going on ahead, you have to be willing, I think, that if your spouse has a failing, you don't not give the punishment. You don't not follow through. You don't just push it aside. You follow through with the punishment. You say you do what you're going to do. You're constantly learning. You're constantly communicating. You're constantly trying to make things better for the relationship. But you first say, if she failed, where did I fail her first? Because there must have been a breakdown somewhere. There has never been an instance where I have disciplined Aria for something in a punishment where I haven't first thought, where did I mess up? And how can I prevent this punishment from happening again by equipping her to succeed in this area?
And just to clarify, he does not have a team of wives.
No. No, I was referring to, I think what I was trying to do is give you a broad view of leadership, and then we can focus it. a little bit. But you're
Just the
right.
way you
No,
said that kind of made me seem like I was like, do you have a harem that I'm unaware of? Can they come help me? I could use some help sometimes.
she at one. Just as a side note, she at one point jokingly
Very
used to
jokingly.
watch Sister Wives, and she's just like, "Oh, I'd love to do that." I'm like, "Why?" And she's like, "Because then I'd have like friends. I don't want to share you in intimate ways, but I just want to have some." And I was like, "This is the weirdest conversation I have ever had with you."
Adult female roommates that can help with the housework and hang out. Sounds
It's
great.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's weird, I know. But
But one of my, I would just like, if it's okay, to name one of my favorite leaders. Now, I'm not too much of a sports fan these days, but I used to be an avid sports fan to the point that it was not a good thing, which is why I'm not as much of a sports fan today. But Tony Dungy, if you guys are not familiar with him, he used to be the coach for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the world champion Indianapolis Colts that he coached to a championship. I believe it was Super Bowl 41 that he won. He's written some great books on leadership in general. There's one called The Mentor Leader. His first book was called Quiet Strength. Quiet Strength is my favorite book of the three that he wrote. And the reason being is he talks about in that book not just about being a great football coach, but how he deals with his family, how he approaches his relationship with his wife and with his kids. And they faced something terrible in that season before he won the Super Bowl where one of his children committed suicide. And in fact, I think it was his oldest son who committed suicide before the season that they won the Super Bowl. And he talks about how that had such a defining moment in their relationship, especially him and his wife. But he talks about that a husband, a leader, is not necessarily that dictator leader who is always smashing down the gavel like a judge, but he has quiet strength. We talked a lot about this podcast being the tender warrior. A good leader knows when to back up and evaluate and be gracious and be loving. And a leader also knows when to say, no, this is a moment that I have to be stern, not mean, but I have to be stern and I have to follow through with what I know is right and what I believe in. So, again, there's a broad focus. Now, how do we focus in? How do we get a more micro version of this for a domestic discipline relationship? This is exactly how you have to approach it. You need to be willing as the leader to know, and you have to really work on this, know when your partner needs you to be kind and gracious and loving, and you need to know when you need to be stern and you need to follow through. And you need to, even though you may be emotionally uncomfortable yourself, you need to not show that. You need to be steady. You need to be calm. You need to be put together. There's many times in this book where he talks about he made these really hard calls in a game, and the entire team said, man, you just look so calm. We were able to execute that because you just look like, yeah, this is the right call, no big deal. And he said inside I was falling apart. I had no idea if I made the right call. I was worried about whether or not that was going to be the right thing to do. A good leader, especially in your relationship with your spouse, you have to be that way sometimes. She can't know. She may be falling apart herself because she's discouraged, she's upset. She's going through something in the punishment, and all these emotions are going through her. She's going through a reset, and all the emotions, or the maintenance spanking, all these emotions are going through. And you have to be steady. You have to not at times show emotion, because if you do, that could derail her process. So it's the biggest takeaway that I would say that a good leader has to do is you have to know when to show emotion and show the right emotion, and make the right call. And sometimes you're not going to know what the right call is going to be. You just have to make the best guess that you can. Aria, I don't know if you would agree with this, but were there times where you questioned a call that I made, but it just seemed like, okay, this must be the right call because he seems very confident about it. Just thought I would propose that question here.
I think at the beginning of our relationship, it was harder for me to yield that aspect of control over decision making. And maybe there were times where I'm like, I'm not sure that this is the right thing to do. There have been several times, especially with your family, because we've always had the concept that you deal with your family stuff.
Yeah.
And for the most part, although you have stepped in when necessary, I deal with my family stuff.
Right. Right.
And so there's been several times I'm like, I don't know if you should have approached that way, or, oh, I don't know. But I trust you. I don't say anything, and then it all works out.
Yeah. Right. Well, yeah. And that's the perfect example. There were times where I didn't know if I was making the right call or not. I had no idea. But I did the very best that I could to make the best decision with the information that I had at that moment. I will say, I think, and I don't know if you would agree with this, but I would say I think 9 times out of 10 I made the right call.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that.
There have been some times where I didn't, and usually those were the times when I questioned myself.
But as the leader, it's your responsibility to make those calls and to
Yes.
kind of live with the consequences, the natural consequences. I'm not talking about imposed consequences.
Right.
Because I, as the submissive partner, I have a responsibility to follow your leadership, to do what I've been asked to do, to follow the rules and the standards that you've set. And if I don't do those things, then I have consequences. Some of those consequences are the natural consequences of life things, and some of those consequences are imposed per our agreed upon structure. But as the leader, you have to deal with all the consequences of your decisions, and they're all the natural consequences. You know, part of our, and I don't think anyone's exempt from this, but especially in our home, because you are the only person earning a tangible income, you have a responsibility to show up to your job, to do the duties you're supposed to do, to work on having those interpersonal relationships at the office so that you don't get fired. You can't go into the office and tell your boss off. You can't you can't do certain
Bunch of people
things.
said we wish we could. No.
And there was a time where you would have, because you were younger, you were a lot more impulsive.
Younger, arrogant. Yeah.
The stakes were lower.
The stakes were lower, exactly. Yeah, stakes were lower.
But you've learned over the years that you can't do that. And so because the natural consequence of that would be a lack of income to provide for our families. So that's a great responsibility that you hold. And I respect the responsibility that you have. So from my position, I try to make your life at home as easy as possible so that you can fulfill your responsibilities to our family.
Yes, you do.
And part of your responsibility is the leadership of this family, but of me specifically as your wife. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, you are responsible to make sure that I am doing what I'm supposed to do. And part of that is checking in on me, making sure that I'm following the rules that I'm supposed to. I think a lot of times what I have seen is I've seen people that look at these relationship structures, these more traditional gender roles or these more traditional values and these hierarchical relationships, and they look at it and they say, oh, the men are in this position of just a lack of responsibility.
Yeah, right. Right.
Because the women are the one, and they look at just the home life, right? Well, the women are the ones that are doing all the cooking and all the cleaning, and they're responsible for the kids, and they're responsible for this. And all of those things are true, although I would strongly encourage you to share parenting because you're both should be active parents.
Really? You're supposed to do that?
But it is true that many times women take on more of the traditional domestic duties around the home, and it can look like the guys just get to sit there and relax and not do anything. But they carry so much responsibility, and I think that it's important for anyone looking into these relationship structures, or anyone who wants this relationship structure, or anyone that has this relationship structure. It's really important to understand that as a submissive partner, yes, I may be doing more of the tangible work at home, and I don't get to see all of the work that my husband is doing, but he has the responsibility to work outside the home, provide the income, provide leadership, have the vision for our family, set goals, set boundaries, check in on me, administer correction and punishment, and to also help guide me so that I don't get to the point of needing punishment. He has to almost take on a mentor role in my life, and he sets the goals and the vision for our family, and so that I know what I'm following.
Yeah.
And those are all things that, I think a lot of times, and this is going to go off on a little bit of a tangent that's maybe outside of our wheelhouse a little bit.
It's okay. I went off on one earlier, so it's okay.
But many times, and I've seen this a lot on social media, where primarily women get on their high horse about the mental load of family life. And I think and it is true that women do bear the invisible mental load of homemaking, of keeping track of the kids' stuff. I told Coda the other day that I really do need to write down our daughter's doctor information for him, tell him where it is, and her dentist, the same thing. Because I take care of all those appointments. I set the appointments. I take her to the appointments. I deal with the billing for those places. And so he doesn't actually know that information. But you know what I don't know? I don't know how to pay our utility bill.
Yeah, we talked about how we both needed to kind of have this conversation about all of that, right?
Right. And so there's certain things that he does in our home that I don't know how to do. And we're not old, but we are at the point where we're realize I think at some point in your mid-30s, you get the realization that you're not going to live forever and you're not completely infallible. And so we do need to write that information down just in case one of us is ever incapable of communicating those things or fulfilling those things.
That's so true.
The other has that information. And so all that to say, yes, women do carry the brunt of that mental load. However, men carry their own mental load. And it's not the same. It's not the day in, day out. It's not the what's for dinner, who's going to what practice, who, do we have groceries in the house? Do we need to run this errand? Those are all the mental load that women typically take on, because those are all the detail work, right? Men have their own mental load, but it's big picture work. It's where are we going to be in 5 years? How is our retirement looking? How is, what is the longevity of these things? What home maintenance projects need to be done in 6 months? Those are typically things that men think about. And men carry more of the physical load of the family. Even in a household where both partners work, men are more likely to work the physical labor jobs where women typically don't. And I just think that there needs to be a little bit more of mutual respect and mutual understanding for each other's position. And as the submissive partner, I can choose to say, gosh, I am so tired. I'm doing all this stuff. I'm following all these rules, and I can have a really bad attitude about it, right? And technically, that wouldn't earn me a punishment, but that may necessitate maintenance. Because the fact is that I shouldn't have a bad attitude about it. But at the same time, I can flip that around and I can say, I'm doing all this stuff around the house. Yes, I'm tired. I'm kind of dragging today, but I am so thankful for a husband that leads me and holds me accountable to these goals. And I'm so thankful that he cares enough to make sure that I am doing what I'm supposed to do. So
we should have just had you do the podcast by yourself, because that was really good.
No, you add a lot.
But no, and just to add to what you said, because that was a perfect segue into where I was going to get it more precise, and as the husband, that is, you hit it on the head earlier when you said mentor to a certain extent. That's why I mentioned Tony Dungy's third book, The Mentor Leader. Because we normally think of a mentorship between the same gender, maybe sometimes, an apprenticeship between a boss or a coworker.
I always think of that word more as in two scenarios, either an older person mentoring a younger person in a particular role, or specifically in like professional development.
Yeah, but some people wouldn't necessarily think of it in a marriage or domestic discipline situation. But absolutely, that's absolutely what that is my job as Aria's husband is to help her. And that's ultimately what this is. This is not a power trip relationship. This is for me to help her become a better person, a better wife, a better mom, and when she walks out those doors, a better woman in society. Without going too much on a tangent, and again, I'm not trying to get into politics and all this kind of stuff, this is the main issue in our world today, I think. Everybody's so concerned and wrapped up with themselves, and really they're not trying to be a better person. They want everybody else to just accept them with all of their, without trying to do anything to better themselves, right?
They want the world to adapt to them rather than...
There you go. That's what I was trying to say. Rather than them learning how to be a more productive citizen and a better person, right? And normally when somebody goes too far in that, I shouldn't say normally, always, when someone goes too far in our society with that,
in
usually,
either direction.
Right. Usually a crime happens, right? And then what happens? They're punished for that. And so that is still a very similar thing right there, is that your job is to help her become a better person, a better wife, a better mother. But you can only do that by making some hard decisions, and leaders have to make hard decisions. That's why there are only a few people in this world that are considered good leaders, and that when you find a good leader, and you've met them before, you've met a good leader, and because you want to follow them when you meet them. But what's so funny is so many people want to be leaders, or they say they do, but they don't realize with that leadership, and I'm going to quote like Spider-Man here, right? With great power comes great responsibility. But that's so true. They want to be a leader without the responsibility. You can't have both. You have to have the responsibility. And what is that responsibility in a domestic discipline relationship? Well, yeah, it's holding her accountable to the rules. It's following through with punishments. It's when you come home from work and you're really tired, and yesterday you flexed the maintenance spanking to today, but you really don't want to do it today because you're still tired. Too bad. Suck it up and do what's right for your relationship. And Aria's smiling because she knows that
Do you
there have been
anticipate being tired tomorrow?
Probably, but she's referring because I flexed a maintenance spanking today till tomorrow. At the time that we're recording this, it's a Saturday, so we normally do that on Saturday, and it'll be a Sunday tomorrow. But the point being is, even if I am tired tomorrow, too bad. Like, you flexed it yesterday, you owe it to her to follow through with what she has asked you to do so that she can hold up to her end. And yeah, it's hard. There's the other thing about following through is it's hard sometimes when, man, she was doing good. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, nailing it, doing a great job. And then Thursday, something happens. And I'm just picking out random days. But Thursday, something happens. And you're like, man, but she was doing so good. I don't want to punish her for that. Yeah, but you're not doing her any favors by saying, well, because you did good Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you get a pass.
Well, and I think like you're speaking from experience, right?
Yeah.
Because we had gotten off of our maintenance schedule.
And I take responsibility for that as the leader.
And because of that, attitude shifted.
Yep.
Attitude suffered, behavior suffered, and I ended up getting a punishment because, ultimately because I did something outside the boundaries of acceptable in our household. However, perhaps it would not have gotten to that point if we had been more consistent with the maintenance schedule.
I agree.
And so we both learned from that.
And by the way, we had a conversation. Like, it wasn't like not in the moment, but after the punishment, we had a conversation talking about this, and I admitted to her that, yeah, I do, regardless of whether you deserve the punishment or not, I do take responsibility for where I failed you, and I will do better not to fail you next time. Remember we had that conversation?
We did.
And so that's what I mean. A good leader knows. If you're going to take all the credit for the wins, you have to take all the credit for the losses too. You don't get to push that off on anybody. Referring to sports again, I hate coaches that try to pass the buck. Well, we lost because of so-and-so. Well, no, you lost because you didn't have your team ready. Your team was not ready to play. And a good coach will accept those things. And so how does that, again, relate to your relationship? It doesn't mean that the coach is not going to have 2-day practices, that he's not going to work more on the fundamentals with his team, that the team is not going to take some responsibility. Just like it doesn't mean that you're not going to follow through with punishments with your wife. It doesn't mean you're not going to follow through on those things, but you ultimately have to take responsibility for why did she fail? What did I do that set her up to do that? I don't know if this will ever happen, but Aria knows that I strive as the leader of our home and as her husband to try to set her up to where she will never get a punishment. Never.
However, I think it is important to note here, though, that you can give me it's important to self-assess, right?
Yeah.
But it's also important to be fair to yourself as much as you strive to be fair to your partner. So, when I earned a punishment, you could self-assess and you could be like, well, we've been off our maintenance schedule. I didn't do this. I didn't do that. And you can make those changes. But there will be times where I earn a punishment. You self-assess and you're like, no, I gave her all the tools.
Sure.
I set her up for success here. She made the decision and took the actions that led to this and that's all on her.
No, that's true. No, I'm not trying to skirt responsibility here at all.
Well, and sometimes, right.
Yeah.
But sometimes you can self-assess and you can be like, no, I don't hold any responsibility. This is all on her because I gave her everything she needed to be successful.
There are times where the coach said, I gave everything the team needed to be successful. They just went out there and played poorly.
And so I just wanted to say, because I think that you are harping on, and I think that it's good because our natural instincts are to try to
pass the buck,
pass blame, and figure out a way out, right? But and I think that that's good that you're harping on really not doing that and taking responsibility. However, there will be times where you're like, no, I don't hold any responsibility here. And it's okay to assess that.
Yes.
But just be fair and try to be objective when you're looking at it. Don't find ways to skirt.
No, and I appreciate you bringing that up because I think this is the next thing that I probably do need to mention, although we've already just talked about it, is this is part of the assessment process that a leader has to go through. Okay, was this an area? First of all, you do need to take responsibility either way. But then you say, okay, was this an area where I set her up to fail? Or again, like you said, was it a time where you set her up for success? You had all the maintenance spankings. You were checking in about the rules either on an app or calling her, however you have it set up. And she just messed up. She lost, right? And but it's important, that you evaluate that, and then you again, regardless of whether it was your fault or hers, follow through. It's difficult, and let me tell you, the first couple punishments we had, it was very uncomfortable for me. Mm-hmm. It is an uncomfortable thing in anything as a leader to follow through on something because you think you're responsible for their failure.
Well,
but you have to follow through with that.
And you've taken a little bit more responsibility than I think you should have at times, where there've been times where you're like, "Oh, I'll call and remind you to do that," or, "Oh, I will do this for you so that you don't forget or that you do these things." And that might be helpful when you're first setting things up, but I had to tell you, like, look, set the rules, set the boundaries, and then give me space to make a decision.
That's true.
In that
That's
area.
True.
Give me just enough rope to hang myself, right? Because ultimately I want to be able to say I either did this or I didn't do it, and either accept the praise and reward and positive affirmation, or accept the punishment, knowing that was all my doing.
You bring up a really good point that I think we didn't touch on is, as the leader, you've got to be, there's two leadership styles, in my opinion, that can get you in trouble, and you've got to learn the balance. Micromanaging your wife is not a good idea. Don't be a micromanager. In fact, some of you guys that are listening out there that have micromanaging bosses, you know what I'm talking about. A micromanaging boss, that sucks. But a boss that can also be worse is a boss that you never get any feedback from. They're so hands-off that you didn't even know there was a problem until you got fired, right? Because they were way too hands-off with you. You thought you were doing fine. They never gave you any feedback. They never helped you with anything, and then all of a sudden you were fired. You've got to learn the balance there, and that's what you were talking about. There are some things that you really do need to help her with, that you need to check in with her on, and then there are some things where you need to go, look, in this area, I am not going to remind you to do this. You need to just do it, and if you don't, there will be consequences. And then there are some areas, and this is why we talk a lot about communication, that you need to ask her, hey, is this an area that I've been a little too hands-off with you, that I need to be a little bit more hands-on? And finding that balance is really, really important. And that's what I think a really good leader knows, when to be hands-on and when to be hands-off. But if you sway too far to either side, it's detrimental to your relationship, because I know there's probably some husbands out there that are way too hands-on with their wives and some that are way too hands-off.
And think about it, when you're first setting up a standard or a rule or a habit, you may need to be a little more hands-on for a period.
Yes, for a period, right.
But
sure.
Eventually get to the point where you step back. When you start a new job, typically there is a training process when you first start that job, so that you learn the duties and responsibilities of your position. You learn how the company wants things done, and you have somebody there kind of guiding you through that process for the first few days, few weeks, depending on what it is.
What it is, yeah.
So when you first set up a rule or habit, you may need to say, okay, I'm going to call and remind you, or I am going to set up a system so that you remember to do these things, or I'm going to check in with you and maybe not punish you, but guide you. And, you know, for instance, if you didn't do it completely correctly, I will guide you and show you, and there won't necessarily be punishment for that
Right.
during the
trial period, if
right,
you will.
the first week or so, you
Right.
know, and just
Right.
say, you know, I'm going to let this habit kind of solidify and kind of get into, and then after a few days, a week, however long you feel is fair, say, okay, now you know what I expect. Now you know how to do it. You've been, you know, you've done this a few times. Now it's going to be put into the punishment system. So if you
right.
don't do it, if you don't remember, you know, I'm stepping back. You're not going to get as much feedback or assistance from me to do these things because you know how to do it now.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah, and I think again that is something that all of you men, I'd be surprised at some point in your jobs, whatever you've done, you've faced some of these very same things. When you first started, you had to go through a training period. Even if you were in a position of management, you had to go through a period where they wanted you to just evaluate everybody before you made changes.
and that's not
you
to
know.
say that your wife is incapable of knowing certain things, or but you may
you're not dumb.
but you may have a specific way you want things done in the home, and as the leader, as the husband, you have a right to, you know, desire and to show her how to do those things. But it's in a way where I don't know how, like, where I'm going with this, but because I think some people may hear that and be like, well, you're treating her like a child, and
Or you're treating her like property.
right.
Or
And that's not
something like that.
really the picture that I want to paint.
No,
It's more
no.
of like, but there's so many, because of like our society and our, you know, there's so many women that desire these types of relationships that did not grow up knowing basic housekeeping and basic things that may need to be
Addressed.
well, and she may need to be shown. She
Yes,
may not
right.
actually know how to do these things, and if you don't know how to do them, then figure out a way to help her. There might be YouTube videos. There might be
Maybe there's a mentor out there.
there might be like
might be.
in-person mentorship. There might be some books, or, you know,
There might be a podcast, maybe.
well, I mean, I'm talking
No,
more
I'm just
about
kidding.
like,
I'm just joking.
I don't know how to I do pretty well, but as far as like if you worked a corporate job that
Right.
required your pants and your shirts to be properly pressed,
Right.
I don't know how to properly press dress clothes. I do
Thank
pretty well
goodness
with
I don't have
ironing.
that. Yeah.
But if you needed like the proper like pleats and like seams and stuff, I don't know how to do that. And so there may be a period where you need to like you may marry a woman who doesn't know how to cook. You know, but there's resources out there to learn.
Absolutely.
You
We're
know,
living in a day and age where it's hard to not find anything.
right. We have abundant resources with the internet, with libraries, with
I was just talking to a guy this
classes.
week that was like, dude, because of YouTube, if you think you can do something and you could borrow the tools, like there's no reason to go to an auto mechanic. Like you could just do it. And I said, well, it depends on what it is. And he said, well, that might be true, but he says, I think you could do a repair on whatever you've got.
And so all
same,
that to
same
say,
same principle there.
and if you marry a woman who has really bad time management, you may want to sit down and schedule out her day and say, look,
Right.
here's what you can realistically get done in the morning. Just kind of feel it out, because again, someone like me that has, you know, grew up with a mentor, you know, I had a grandmother who taught me all of these things, taught me how to structure my day, taught me a lot of homemaking skills. I don't need that type of hands-on mentorship.
That's kind of why I married her. No,
But other women coming into this that did not have the luxury of someone showing them in their childhood how to do these things.
Right.
They may need their husbands to step in and say, this is how you clean this, and this is how long it should take. And as you practice, you'll get faster. And this is what you can do throughout the day. And this is, this is how you should structure your day. Do these things and then do this. And she may need that type of leadership to just figure it out. And that's okay.
Yeah. And again, I believe that, she is not helpless. That's what we're trying to get. She's not helpless, but.
And it's not a place of like coming from like, oh, you're so incompetent.
Exactly.
The man must explain to you all the things.
Yeah, no, that goes back to being a dictator, and that's not what this is.
But it's coming from a place of like, I love you and I want you to be the best person, the best partner, the best wife possible. So I'm going to give you these resources to help you grow and develop in this area.
Yes.
That should be the attitude.
Just like what we do as parents for our children. We need to do the same thing for our wives.
But in a different way, because she is an adult that has more capacity.
Right. And
that's what I'm getting at. It's like, don't teach her, don't treat her like a child.
Right.
And that's kind of where I was getting. It's like, she's not property. She's not a child. But she may require some more hands-on leadership. Yeah.
And I wasn't trying to say that.
Oh, no, I know you weren't. I was just like, I just wanted to make sure like that was my point.
Yeah. And so to kind of wrap this up into a bow, what is this responsibility of the leader? Ultimately, it's to make, and this will never happen because we're not perfect. But we strive, as I always tell my family, we strive for excellence, not perfection in this home. But it's for you to strive when you know everything is working, is that she's been consistent. You have been consistent. If it involves punishment or maintenance spankings, letting her know what the expectations are each day, and keeping that line of communication open so that she knows that you're talking to her about what's working, what's not, and what is expected, and knowing what resources she may need to be successful. So as the leader, your job is to try to make the ship flow as best as possible on that ocean, regardless of what storms come. Your job is to try to make that ship not capsize.
And know how to set goals and standards, know how to be forward thinking, and know what to delegate.
That's right. Right.
Because you have to be able to count on your wife to be responsible for certain tasks, because you can't do it all.
Can't do it all.
And you have to trust her to delegate tasks to her, and then hold her accountable for the things that you have given her.
There's a great book, by the way, that I would recommend that you all read. It has nothing to do with domestic discipline, and then it has everything to do with domestic discipline. If you haven't read it, it's called Boundaries. And it's a book that I had read before, but I am now rereading. And it's really good because it does have a section in there talking about relationships. But the best thing a leader knows to do is to put up boundaries for himself and boundaries for his wife and his family. And another thing that we have a hard time in our society with right now is putting up boundaries. There's a lot of people that think they just have the right to knock down boundaries. They do not, and they especially do not for your family. And so you have to set up as the leader to let your wife know, here's where the boundaries are for not only the health of our relationship and our home, but boundaries in order for me to be a good leader and for you to be a good wife. And let her know, you cross this boundary, that's when a punishment is delivered. For whatever that boundary is, because there's different boundaries for different situations and parts of the home. But I recommend that book. Read that book. Boundaries is good.
You love a good metaphor, don't you?
I love a good metaphor.
I was like,
Yeah.
in this podcast, you compared relationships to sports teams, a ship. Was there anything else that I missed?
Just, ask my team at my job. I use metaphors all the time. I'm the metaphor kind of guy.
Yep.
So you've been married to me long enough. You know that.
I know. I was just like, wow, how many different metaphors can we get in one podcast?
Hey, you guys, if you don't like metaphors, there's maybe a different podcast out there. No, keep listening. Keep listening.
I was just like, somebody's going to turn it into a drinking game every time you reference relationships.
Just drink responsibly. That's all I'm going to say. Don't drink and drive.
Oh, goodness. Anyway, guys, we really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah.
We're glad that you listened to us today, and just wanted to remind you our link to our Patreon is in the comments, as well as our email is down in the description box, and our Instagram handles if you want to follow us along there.
Quick announcement. We are going to be adding some more things to the Patreon. And so if you were thinking about being a Patreon subscriber or supporter. Anyway,
Not sure.
I'm not sure which
Either
one
works.
goes. And those of you who have been, if you feel like you're not getting enough content, we're going to be doing that. I was talking with Aria yesterday, and hopefully one will be out by the time you even hear this podcast. But twice a month, I'm going to do my own solo podcast. It's not going to be very long. It's going to be about 15 or 20 minutes is all. But twice a month, you're going to get that content from me. I may write a little bit, but Aria knows I'm not the best writer, but I love to podcast and I love to talk. I've been in radio before. So I just wanted to let you guys know, if you've been thinking about supporting us on Patreon or you have supported us, thank you. But if you feel like you're not quite getting enough content, more content is coming.
Yes, I was about to say I've been very inconsistent with the schedule of putting out content on Patreon, but I am going to put together a content calendar so that I can be more consistent with getting things uploaded.
And as the leader, I'm going to help her with that. So thank you all for tuning in, though.
Bye.